on. So firstly, before we get started, I want to introduce myself, who I know all of you probably are very aware of who I am, but maybe not so aware of Trudy Watson, who's also supporting me today in the webinar. Trudy joined us last week as our technical specialist. I'm really excited to have her on board to help on the technical side of the TMC business. So between us, we'll be hosting today's forum. I also want to big thank you to Planet Textiles, who both the webinar and the summit are supported by, and also very much hot off the press today, we also want to announce that we are just about to enter into a relationship with the Nature Conservancy and the Ocean Division to support the ongoing work of TMC. And further details of this are going to follow, but this is super exciting for us because we really want to make sure that the summit and the continued work of TMC continue to kind of push the direction for this topic and make sure we can provide the greatest impact across the industry that we can. So with this topic that is accelerating quickly and growing in level of engagement across the industry and globe, we felt it was really important to host these pre-summit events. And there's a reason for that today. What we want to do is to give you an opportunity that we can introduce you to a few speakers, and you've just literally got a handful of them today. But also, more importantly, to give you an opportunity to start dialogue with us. We're very much aware that since COVID and the need to go to online forums, sometimes the communication between delegates in these sorts of forums can get a little bit difficult, and we want to make sure that we're listening to you, giving you that place and space to provide your thoughts and your feedback. So we'll be taking the dialogue from today into the final preparations of the summit as we go through the next few months. So to position today's event, this is an opportunity to hear from our great panel speakers, who I'll be introducing in a minute, and also see what their key areas of focus are as we go into the summit. It's also an opportunity for us to engage you all in conversations and look at ways that we can get a feel of what the key topics are and the specialist areas that we need to be making sure that our breakouts and our roundtables within the summit are focusing on. So where will you as participants get the greatest value from the summit? In the time that we have, I'd ask that you keep any topic questions raised in the Q&A kind of top line, and anything that's deemed to go too much into depth we'll probably take offline and go into more depth within the summit. So we'll just see what comes through on the chat with regards to your questions later. Yes, so just to give you an overview of who's in the call today, we've had over 80 sign-ups for today's call, and it covers a real diversity of industry participants, from brands and retailers, academia, consultancies, testing facilities, technology providers, and media. So I'm hoping today that between you all, we can get to that really kind of useful, juicy level of conversation and take us forwards. As far as agenda for today, it's pretty simple. We're going to keep the core of it focused to our panel and the questions that we're addressing to the panel. But before we get into that, I would like to give just a brief summary to the summit, an introduction to our panelists today, and each panelist will then have further time to go into more detail to themselves, their organisations, and most importantly, the focus area of work for them. As we then move into the facilitated Q&A, I'll also be pitching questions back to you, the participants today. So please get those questions prepared, and Trudy will be helping me manage the chat box today so we get your questions, as many of them answered as we can. As we go into the wrap up, I want to try and keep you all with us till the end, and we will be providing you with a discount code to sign up if you're interested as we close up today's forum. So just one final thing, you will see our hashtag in the top right hand corner of this slide, and we do ask you that if you're making any chat on social media that you try and include our hashtag so we can follow the conversation ourselves. So I'm going to now hand over to the panel. Oops, no, I'm going to give you an overview of the summit, sorry. The summit is a 3-day summit with a wrap up on a final day on April the 1st, so we'll be taking a on each one of the 3 days, 23rd, 24th and 25th of March, and we will reconvene a week later for a wrap-up. And the topic areas for the summit are going to be focused around 3 areas. So the first one, which we're going into today, as you can see highlighted in green, is around measurement. So within this topic area, we'll be delving deeply into test methodology and policy development. Our subsequent topic areas are science, where we'll be bringing together both textile research and environmental research in a really in a way that we can bring together both of those areas of research to make the greatest impact we possibly can. And then our third topic area is around product development. So this is where we're looking at innovation, technology and manufacturing to make sure that what we're learning from the science and the measurement topic areas can be taken forwards with regards to product change. So those are the 3 topic areas. But what to expect from the summit, we really want this to be a very global and collaborative commitment to driving impact in this area. So we've purposely ensured that we can get a global cross-section of speakers, participants, stakeholders within this, because we really believe this is not a topic that can be worked in silo, but it needs to be worked across both and global partners. We're very keen to make sure that our action sessions, so our roundtables for each one of those 3 topic areas, enables us to define what needs to happen as far as action and to make those commitments to make sure that as we come out of the summit, we can actually carry those forwards. We'll also be providing facilitated virtual networking across different sectors, geographies, and including virtual exhibition space. And as participants, you'll get access to the recordings of each session during and after the event. And then finally, to wrap up, each delegate will be provided with a summit outputs report and a roadmap so that we can actually map what actions need to be taken across the industry as we come out of this. So I'm going to introduce our panel today. So we've got Heather Elliot from AATCC, chair of the RA100 committee, Dr. Mark Taylor from the University of Leeds, and Jerome Pero from FESI, representing cross-industry agreement on microfibres, also on the panel today. Each one of these panelists have been working with TMC for a number of years now, and each one of them also has a huge heritage and amount of work on this area. So I can't think of anybody better to kind of support this topic as we go into today's conversation. So I'm not going to do any more of an introduction to that, but at this point I'm going to pass over to Heather to talk a little bit about her background in this topic and introduce the work of AATCC. So Heather, thank you, over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. Hi, I'm Heather, and I'm with the AATCC, or the American Association of Textile Chemists and Colorists. The AATCC was founded November 3rd, 1921, so we've been around for quite a while. We consist of voluntary members, so members are usually employees of textile, apparel, and home goods manufacturers, dye and chemical manufacturers, testing laboratories, consumer and retail organizations, state and federal government agencies, colleges and universities. We have thousands of individual and corporate members in more than 60 countries worldwide. Even though we have the word American in our name, we are a global standardizing organization. We are internationally recognized for our standards methods of testing fibers and fabrics to measure and evaluate such performance characteristics as color fastness, appearance, sole release, dimensional change, and water resistance. So there's 2 standardizing organizations within the within North America. We've got American Association of Textile Chemists and Colorists, AATCC, and we also have ASTM. The AATCC is in charge of all the test methods that are regarding to anything that you can do to a textile that is related to wet processing, so anything testing moisture management, finishes, color fastness, dyeing, things like that. ASTM is more your physical test methods like abrasion, stretch, recovery, things like that. If you want to learn more about the AATCC, our website is listed right there. for the test method that we're talking about today, the purpose of the fiber release global standardized test method is for the textile industry to use it for innovating fabrics that will help minimize or solve the fiber release issue, as well as to create a standard way for research groups to streamline a way to measure fiber release during their research projects. So we call it fiber release instead of microfibers because we do have some members in our committee that create microfibers, which is a size of fiber. So we want to differentiate between the term microfiber, which is a technical term for a particular size of fiber, versus what is released when you wash a garment or wash a material. So we call it fiber release or fiber fragmentation. Our test method is a combination of two test methods, really. It's a combination of the color fastness test method, where you do an accelerated laundering test method to release the fibers within a little canister. And it's very similar to the TMC method. And then it's combined with the test method for total suspended solids from the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, where you take the canister that you generate the fibers from, and then you filter that out using the total suspended solids test method. So we began making this test method in 2016, so it's been a while. It's gone through several iterations to where we are now, where we have submitted it to ballot, so fingers crossed it gets passed through. Research, testing, vetting of a global standardized test method can take years. The committee has to come to an agreement on what the standard will look like. So it's not just one person making a decision on what the test method would look like. It is a group of people that have many, many years of experience in the textile industry. So a real quick explanation of the standard is you generate the fibers using a laundrometer, or in Europe you call it a gyro wash, and then you generate the fibers that way, and then you filter it through a glass fiber filter filtration funnel system. And then of course, you weigh the filter before, and then you weigh the filter after you generate the fibers, and you filter them out, and that will give you the amount of fibers that have been released. And I am finished.
It'd help if I unmute myself. Thank you very much, Heather. Kind of mean to ask you to sum that up in 2 minutes, because it's been a huge amount of work, and really appreciative of all the support you've given us also as we've been developing ours. So I'm going to pass over to Mark to talk about his work at Leeds University. So Mark, over to you.
Hi Sophie, thanks. I've not been looking at this problem for quite as long as Heather, only for about 3.5 years. But without knowing what was going on in the AATCC, we quickly realised that what was needed was a standard that everybody could test to. We'd done some work looking at the existing literature from lots of other researchers that had started looking at the problem and realised that they were all doing it differently. And initially thought we could, it'd be really easy because you just stick it all in a washing machine and it'd be dead easy. And then quickly realised that that wasn't going to be possible. And because it's the best way to do it, ended up with a way very similar to the way that Heather and the AATCC have been developing, using a gyro wash accelerated laundrometer type machine. We've been working on that for a few years now with support from the TMC and the European Outdoor Group prior to that. And what can I say? For a long time, it was us driving this. Yeah, Heather's gone through everything on that screen really, so I won't talk too much about that. But we went through the process of developing a standard, and it was easy when it was just me and my colleagues and our research assistant. Then went out to Brussels to some meetings that were hosted by Jerome's organisation, when I was able to beat them into agreeing that the way the TMC were measuring microfibers was probably the best way, so that was great. And more recently, we've been trying to have the same discussions with the European standards committees, and it becomes a bit harder then because, as Heather says, you end up with lots of people all with their own ideas, all trying to steer it in the direction that they think's best, and that's where we are with it now, really, in terms of a standard. TMC standard is the TMC standard. It exists, it's there. We're just trying to persuade the rest of the world that they need to test to it too. Luckily, the AATCC standard is very, very similar. So we've got some good stuff there. We've done some round robin work and some analysis on the results, and we're pretty confident that you can get agreement between laboratories, which is a really good sign, because without that it'd be pointless. What else could I say? Thanks a bit, Sophie. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you've done a great job there, Mark. Again, really hard to sum that up just in a couple of minutes. But I think, engaging Heather and Mark in the conversation today, I think is really super important, as in a minute we're going to move to Jerome. There's a lot of conversation at the moment about how we can develop policy. But as Mark said at the beginning of his slides here, was at the beginning there was a lot of diversity with regards to different methods that people were using. So when we look at policy development, then it becomes quite difficult. So at that point, I'm going to pass over to Jerome now to kind of talk more on the policy side and how we can start to bring these two elements together to accelerate change within this topic. So Jerome, if I can pass over to you.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon for some of you, good evening for others, and good morning for Heather and the ones from the US. Thanks for the invitation and to give me a couple of minutes presenting the advancements of the cross-industry agreement. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I'll be very brief also with my introduction. So as some of you may know, my name is Jerome Pero. I'm the Secretary General of FASI, which represents the sporting goods industry. So we have in our membership brands like Nike, Adidas, and so on, but also retailers such as Foot Locker and many national or regional organizations. Yeah, we're active on equipment, footwear, and clothing sites. So that's what we cover. Just a brief introduction. A lot was said already by Mark and Heather, but basically a bit more than 2 years ago, the EU started looking into microplastics as an area that they urgently needed to develop policies or regulations on. And 2 years ago, a bit more than 2 years ago, the discussion was quite chaotic. There were a lot of sectors involved, a lot of standards available or being developed in parallel, and so there was a lot of need for collaboration. So this is when a number of industry organizations, and you can see here on the screen some of them, so the detergent sector, the Man-Made Fiber Association, the Outdoor Group, Euratex, the textile manufacturers and companies from Europe, and ourselves got together. We also invited other sectors whom have not yet officially joined, but are of course interested in the discussion. And we decided that, before building a house from the roof and already working on policy options, together with the EU, we should first establish an internationally recognized standardized test method in order that we could really identify, quantify all the emission routes, and that we could know all the hotspots along the supply chain, and understand what and how efficiently we could eventually at some point legislate. So for more than 2 years, we were involved with, you can see here some of the, universities, test labs, public and private, that are also in the call today and will be in March around the table. And we have been discussing on harmonization to make sure that in the end we come up with a result, whether it's called the TMC standard or whatever, that really works for everybody globally. If you move to the next slide, regarding the policy developments, there's a lot happening. Actually, we also learned today about some recent developments, which I will tell you about. But basically, you can see here that in the mission statements of President Ursula von der Leyen when she was appointed 1 year ago, and also the back then new Commissioner Sinkevicius for Environment and Oceans and Fisheries, microplastics was really spelled out in their mission letter and in their policy priorities. So there will be a lot of efforts regarding this. And without dwelling too much into details, you can see here some of the upcoming regulatory steps. As some of you may know, next year the EU is expected to publish the EU textile strategy. This is an action under the Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan. So be sure that microplastics or microfibers or fiber fragmentation, I mean, obviously the definition and the language will be adapted by then, will be addressed. So far, the Commission calls it microplastics, but they also cover unintentional release of microplastics from textiles articles. It will be mentioned in this, and it will be somehow legislated or regulated. In parallel, I mean, and to get there, the EU is also working on a study which will look at policy recommendations, and it is about to be launched currently. I'm trying to find out actually whether they launched it already or not, so I'm in discussion with the Commission on this. But basically they will very soon launch a study which will be published next year and propose some policy recommendations, and we hope that the majority of stakeholders here around the table and all the people involved in the cross-industry agreement will also be listened to and will have their word during the study. The European Commission told us numerous times they will make some sort of legislative proposals on microplastic next year in 2021. There will be a consultation process and so on. We will make sure that everybody contributes, but the exact date has not been published yet. In the meantime, also there is the OECD report that is being currently drafted. Some of you are probably working on it. And we also now very recently learned that France, in their very recent plastic law, are addressing textiles, microplastics from textile articles to be addressed by 2022, and there will be apparently a working group launched with ADEM and so on. So you can see that there are many things happening in parallel, and the overall objective of our coalition of organizations, so to say, is to make sure that everybody is aligned and working at the same speed. And that's
Great.
it.
Thank you very much, Jerome. That's brilliant. And I think, you know, really important for today's conversation. You know, we've got people in the room here today and also going into the summit. As I say, we've only got a handful of the speakers from the summit with us today. But I think as you're aware of what policy needs are coming forwards down the pipe, if we can engage those stakeholders that can help at this level to make sure that the research gaps are being filled, that subsequent test methods are being developed as needed. I think that's what we're really intending from the summit, is to bring together those stakeholders that enable us to kind of connect all the dots and make sure that when those policy questions or policy demands do come in, that we've got the support network to provide you the science-based support that's required. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to the panel discussion. We're going to delve in. We've got some predetermined questions for the panel today, but also please start to prepare any thoughts or questions for any of the panelists as we go through. As I said before, Trudy's going to be managing the chat that comes through the chat box and jumping in with additional questions to our panel speakers. So please get those coming in. And also, what I want to just stress, it's a bit like a pick your own adventure, really. We're not, we're very much wanting to hear your thoughts and your direction, as I say, as we get to the final stages of kind of pulling together the speakers and the agenda and how the round tables are coming together. So if you can provide your feedback in today's forum, we can make sure that that goes forwards to the summit committee. Yeah, so I think that's it. So I'm going to start maybe with Mark, actually. Because I think, quite a lot of this comes down to the research. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen an increase in the amount of academic papers that are coming through this topic, although it seemed to start as a relatively simple topic. As it gets further into the research behind it, it gets more and more complex, and we start to see new areas of it coming through. Mark, can you maybe talk a little bit about where you see potential gaps in research, or the research that's coming through that can help inform the direction of travel as we go forwards? Any thoughts there?
So what have I read recently? There's the study from Portsmouth where they looked at the different devices that might be able to capture fibre fragments from laundry, which was quite an interesting piece of work. Although I did think that on reading it, 1.8 kilogram wash loads weren't very realistic, and I think that's something people could do. I've done a big study on, well, as you know, Sophie, because I sent you a copy of it recently, didn't I? But looking at the results that come from all the different papers that have been published, and looking at the differences in the way they've done their laundry and the size of wash loads, and comparing that to the research that's out there about how people actually do their laundry, at least in Europe, because that's where information I've got available for. And I think there's quite a bit of work needs to be done there. The long-term fate of the fibres, you know, there's a recent study from the UK water industry that, if you read it carefully, implies that in the UK, basically no microfibres or fibre fragments make it past the wastewater treatment plants. So if that's true of other developed countries, then where are all the fibres in the rivers and the oceans coming from? And I think we're only just starting to investigate that. And as some people here might know, I've got a bit of a bugbear about people thinking this is just a plastics problem, because if you look at any of the research going back a few years to Rachel Miller's or even more recent studies, you'll see that there's far more cellulose in the ocean than there is polyester. And apparently they're both about 35% or so of global fibre consumption. So why is there more cellulose? It presumably is because it's been around a lot longer and it doesn't biodegrade like some people would try and have us believe, or at least it doesn't biodegrade in a deep ocean environment, which is something that none of the standards out there really simulate. I know some claim to, but they don't have the pressure involved. So what else? You stumped me a little bit, Sophie, because you did have me down as number. No, don't worry, it's number 2 on your list. But I just, I mean.
Well, I mean, what I'm hearing here from you, Mark, is 2 key areas. One is around quantification from the textile industry. You know, if you know an amount of this is being captured at the wastewater treatment level and it's not actually getting to the environmental areas, whether that's sea or land that we're intending, I think there is a piece that we do need to pick up at the summit around quantification. And the other one is making sure that the summit embraces all fibre types and not just the synthetics. And yeah, you and I have had many conversations about, you know, the development of research coming through in cellulosics. So I think those are 2 key areas that I think would be really interesting to delve deeper into as we get to the summit. And we can always come back and ask you more later, Mark, if you want. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's not right. It wasn't really. It was just that I just opened up this what you'd sent us, and I thought, oh great, I'm second after Heather. I've got a bit of time to think about this. Don't worry about it. I would also say that obviously it may well be that much of the developed world has efficient wastewater treatment plants like the UK does, but there's still much of the world that probably doesn't. And I've on pretty good authority that say even in the United States, it depends where you are. That in some of the bigger cities, their wastewater treatment plants are fantastic, but when you get into more rural areas, there isn't as good. And then the other thing that people are starting to look at, and again we've talked about this a few times, is the airborne fibres that are floating around us all the time. Tom Stanton published something about that a couple of years ago, and it may well be that we're actually getting more fibres into the water from that source than we do from laundry. Yeah. We don't know, so more research needs to be done.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, I think we can talk about this for a long time, more than we've actually got available today. And I think, you know, as Mark said, there's a lot of new research coming through that means that, you know, there is going to be needing to be some kind of change of direction or some additional things put into this topic area. So I think with that, maybe to move over to Heather, and maybe Mark stumped you and provided all the response that you were going to provide on that question as well. But I think what I'm interested to know from you, Heather, as well is what areas of research would you like to see addressed at the summit that maybe help move us? I mean, at the moment, the core of your work and Mark's work has been around the water-based pollution from this. But can you, is there any other areas of research that you would like to see addressed at the summit that you feel is coming through?
Yeah, I think the area of atmospheric deposition, like Mark was talking about, like or what we would call dry shedding, would be a really interesting area of research to look at, one that hasn't been looked at as thoroughly as released through laundry. If you're a glasses wearer like I am, if you pull your glasses off at any time of the day and you look really closely at the dust that's fallen on your glasses, you'll see most of it is fibers. If you look at the dust that's fallen in like people like me that don't dust all the time in our house, if you look at the dust that's fallen in your house and you just kind of like really look at it, you'll see that a lot of that dust is fibers. So I think that that's a huge area that's being missed as far as studies are concerned, that I think should be looked at more thoroughly, just to see if that's really where the majority of the fibers are coming from versus washing. Because like Mark was saying, like we have good wastewater treatment plants in a lot of the places, but we're still finding fibers. There was one study, I want to say it was by the University of Toronto, but I'm not exactly sure, I can't remember. But they were looking at the Hudson River, and they were collecting fibers downstream from wastewater treatment plants, thinking that most of the fibers would be there. However, most of the fibers that they found in the river were outside of hiking trails. And a lot of the fibers that they were finding were blue, which to me is like, is that denim? They didn't say it was, but you know, it's interesting that a lot of the fibers that they were finding were outside of like natural park areas that people traverse a lot versus outside of the wastewater treatment plants. So I think that would be a really interesting area of research.
Great. No, I mean, that's brilliant you say that, you know, and again, aligning with what Mark's saying there. And just to kind of drop a little carrot to those on the call today, we've got a speaker that's joining us. I'm not quite sure what details have gone onto the website yet, but somebody from the University of West of England here in Bristol, the UK, a specialist in air pollution, particularly fibres and the impact on human health. So he will be speaking at the summit. So I do encourage people to come along and engage in that conversation. We are very keen at the summit to make sure that we are moving the dial from, you know, as I say, water-based release at the moment to other areas that are cropping up on the agenda. So at this point, I'm seeing a few chats coming through in the chat box. Some comments around airborne fibres from carpets, but I want to actually put a question back to the participants at the moment. From the research that you're doing within your organisation, what topic areas are you seeing coming forwards that you would like to see addressed at the summit? You know, you've heard already about kind of quantification, different fibre types, airborne fibres. Is there anything around eco-toxicity or biodegradation, new technologies, etc.? So please, as we're going on to the next questions, if you could maybe just pop question 1 and any response you have, we will gather those up as we go forwards. But yeah, really keen to hear from the participants, or if anybody's got any questions they want to unmute and ask the panel with regards to this first topic of research, please do now. If not, we will move on. Okay, thank you. So at this point, I want to move over to Jerome and kind of bring in the policy part of this. And what do you see as the proposed actions required to expedite work at the policy level? So, you know, you've got a very good view of what's coming down the pipe with regards to, you know, what the policymakers are expecting. And you've heard the conversation from Heather and Mark with regards to the research that's coming through. But really, what would you like to see addressed at the summit to support the work that you need to do with your stakeholders going forwards?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion from a scientific standpoint, but also from a policy making standpoint. And myself, you know, I'm not a technical expert, but I'm involved in these policy discussions since the last 10 years. And every day I learn something new regarding airborne and so on and so on. So I really understand that the emission routes and the problem in general is very global, very complex. And, you know, 2 years ago, the EU really wanted to already start legislating because there was so much attention on this issue, understandably so, of course. And they wanted to do so by immediately looking at policy recommendations such as, you know, labeling or you know, maybe potential bans on various materials and things like that. And, you know, I think what we're learning from today's discussion and all the recent discussions we had is that, you know, when you do policy making, what we support is science-based policy. So we cannot, of course, use the scientific discussion as an excuse to slow down things, but we want to make sure that we avoid any regrettable situation or unforeseen circumstances. So the idea is really to make sure that we legislate effectively, that there's an effective mix of industry initiatives and EU policy recommendations. I'm talking here on behalf of the EU, but of course the issue is global, and then we will get to harmonization later on. But you know, I think that what we would like to see being discussed is potential alignment from the EU level discussions that we have now with the SEN standard, for example, with the standard that has been now brought to the SEN TC 248, aligned with potential ISO standards discussions, to make sure that all of this is reflected, of course, in the upcoming EU Commission study that is to be launched. And my colleague Mauro Scaglia from Eurotex will probably be able to give you more information during the seminar, during the summit, sorry, in March. But I think that these are the things, you know, it's really that we use the summit as an incubator of knowledge to make sure that we influence the policymaking discussion in a way that is, you know, that can scale up things, that can accelerate things, that can have a life cycle approach to the products that we're talking about.
Yeah, great. And I think just to let you know that, as you mentioned, Mauro will be representing CIA actually at the summit. So it'd be great to have him there. But also representing the US side of this conversation, we'll have Heidi Sanborn, who will be bringing forwards information representing the US. And I believe we also have Crystal Moody-Wood on the line today, who ran a very successful topic workshop a couple of weeks ago. And there was a lot of conversation there around US-based legislation. So what we're also keen to do at the summit is to make sure that we're not working in regional silos, that we're working with awareness of what's happening across the globe. So really trying to, as you say, incubate those conversations, and that's where we'll be using the breakout roundtables to take those conversations deeper and get really good dialogue between various different stakeholders on the same sorts of topics. So yeah, great thoughts and feedback there. I'm just very aware that there seems to be a lot of chat bubbles coming up. Trudy, I just want to check in and see if there's anything key coming through from the participants that you need to bring up at this point.
Yeah, I actually put that first question in that you asked, and there's some interest here around if there's any research on how fibers absorb other chemicals into the water environment, and how does that result in increased risk to wildlife and human populations. I don't know if any of our panelists are aware of any information in that, and as Heather puts, or how soil or fungi are also affected by that.
Yeah. So to that point, before you go on, sorry, I was seeing a lot more chat coming through. We've got Andy Booth from Sintef in Norway, who's going to be representing the toxicology or eco-toxicity part of the conversation. I think there is a lot of conversation coming through, a lot of questions we're getting from our TMC members about, you know, the impact of the chemistry through the textiles and what effect that has. So again, we're trying to make sure that we're bringing forward speakers into the forum to address these emerging areas of research that will be required. I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything they want to say on that one. If not, is there anything else there, Trudy?
There's some definite questions. I think there's things here as well that will be likely covered off in the summit in more detail as well. For example, things on research on how garment design, for example, filament, staple fiber and fleeces impact microfiber release, as well as standardized in what's the size threshold, standardized measurement methodology. So definitely a lot of things coming through, but I think maybe carry on with some of your questions, and we'll see if there's any trends from others.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Trudy. Thanks for gathering those up for me. I think I'm going to go on. There's a couple more questions I want to ask Jerome, but before I do, again, a question back to the participants in the call today. What concerns do your organisations have around policy? You know, I know, you know, some organisations come to me and their concerns, you know, if they're not ready by the time policy comes in, you know, what do they need to do? People are always asking, you know, what is the time frame for policy development? They want to make sure that they're ready. If you've got any key concerns that you're hearing across your organisations, we would love to hear what they are. To again, make sure that we're getting those addressed as we go into the deeper conversation at the summit. Okay, and I suppose, Jerome, going back to the policy part, you know, what are some of the risks that you see for industry, or what risks do they need to be aware of as policy is being developed?
Well, I mean, there are always many risks when policy is developed. On the one side, you have the scientific discussion. On the other side, you have the more political / emotional discussion as well, which sometimes can really push to, you know, like silver bullets, blanket solutions, which in the end have unforeseen consequences, and things like that. So there are many risks, and this is why it's very important that, you know, the industry is also part of the discussion together with the academic discussion. I think that some of the major risks that we are identifying for our members, for example, is the transition times. You mentioned it, Sophie. To understand will the process last to develop legislation. How much will the legislative proposals be in line with the industrial realities and the complexities of the supply chain? How will they be enforced at you know at product import level, export level, and so on? So there are many questions on this, of course. I think that another huge risk that we're facing, and that's why it's so important to have such conversations as today or in March, are about the proliferation of various measures, which is of course something we want to avoid, whether member states initiatives, you know, using different methods, using different definitions. We have seen, for example, how important the discussion regarding microplastic has been on the intentional release of microplastics, which will be tackled in a REACH restriction. And there has been a lot of debate regarding just the definition of a microplastic. So I think that, you know, the scalability and efficiency of any legislative proposal will really depend on the scientific discussion and the inputs from the industry in this entire consultation phase to make sure that everything is scaled up.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think, as you know, you talk about timelines and everything. One of the key outcomes that we want to be getting to is this cross-industry, cross-global roadmap. It's something we're very, very keen on, and the summit committee has been speaking about, you know, what kind of shape that takes. But as you talk about the timeline with regards to policy development, that all obviously needs to underpin everything else that we're doing. And if we can collectively work through what that roadmap looks like, making sure that all the elements of it kind of align, then hopefully coming out the other end, those impacts, those the measures that we take to get to those impacts are going to be far easier to achieve than to go off in lots of different directions. So yeah, I'm super excited about the shape that the roadmap's going to take. Okay then. So Trudy, anything coming through on those questions back to the participants on concerns for organisations?
Let me remember to unmute myself. Not specifically no to organisations, but I would say that there is a question that came in around chemical absorption and whether the panelists think that that could be the next big issue for the industry to be tackling.
Yeah, great question. So I don't know, Mark, Heather or Jerome, if you've got any thoughts on that.
I mean, it is something of concern, and it may well be one of the next big issues. There's been some debate for a year or so now about what type of fibres are more likely to carry pollutants. But I think the truth is that nobody's really looked at it yet, so we don't know, and so it may well. Obviously, as manufacturers, you perhaps are specifying fabrics that have some harsh chemical treatments done to them, just in terms of the colour that you add to them, or the easy care finishes, or the water repellent finishes, or the wicking finishes you add, and how durable are those chemicals, and you know, do they come off? Are they staying on the fibres as they end up in their ultimate fates in the ocean, and then having knock-on effects? And I think the truth of the matter is we just don't know.
Okay. And I think, I don't know if everybody actually joined the call today, but I know we did have some chemical suppliers signed up for the call today. If anybody is on the line and they want to drop me even a private chat and want to particularly participate in the summit and put your thoughts across with regards to that, we would love to hear from you. Yeah, I think it's going to take a real diversity of brains coming together to make sure that we can get all these questions addressed. Okay. Anything else coming up on the chat there before we move on?
Maybe before we look again at the chat, and to complement what Mark just responded to, that question of potential upcoming issues. If the trend of policymaking follows the same logic it did with microplastics a couple of years ago, I see more and more that also nanoplastics is now being slowly discussed. So this is also something you eventually all need to keep an eye on too.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jerome. I don't know who, I'm sure many of you that are on the call today were in Micro 2020. I think it was the week before last. Nano came up in a lot of the presentations. It was a week-long academic-based forum on the topic. I think forums ran from 9 AM to 9 PM across 5 days. So you can imagine how many different academics were presenting their work, and I heard nano come up quite a few times. So yeah, I agree with you there. I think it's an emerging area that's going to be coming through.
If I could jump in real quick, I think it would be interesting with, you know, the looking at the nanoparticles and also toxicity is, now that we're dealing with COVID, there's a lot of companies that are starting to put antiviral and antibacterial finishes on fabrics, and I would love to see if those fibers do anything to, like, the microscopic organisms that we depend on for survival, if those are going to cause fertile issues or like any kind of toxicity or death or anything like that to those organisms. That would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think definitely with the stakeholders that we've got engaged for the summit that kind of cover the marine biology side of things, or the chemistry side, we can bring those into the conversation and see what research has been done so far in those areas. But yeah, great point to bring up there, Heather. Anything else? Right, I'm going to switch.
Oh, sorry, Sophie, I was just going to say there was one question asking around global atmospheric fibre migration. Could that be contaminating and swaying local fibre fragmentation testing in specific areas? And are atmospheric models utilised when mapping or testing fibre fragmentation geographically? I don't know if anybody's thought about, looked at, or if this is a new area for us here.
Our old head of school was talking just about that. Last year he was trying to get some money together to look at how ocean currents might be driving fibres around. I'm not aware that it's been done. It's been talked about. In terms of air currents, I've heard of nothing at all, but don't know if that answers your question.
I think that sounds like a very complex question that we need more than a couple of minutes to answer. Yeah, but no, great to have that brought up. I think to your point there, you were talking about the cost of it, or where the money comes from, Mark. I do want to switch gears. You know, we've got a few minutes left here. One of the key things that we do need to make sure that is covered off is how things are funded. So this is really a question across the panel. Who do you see is ultimately responsible for funding work in this area? Do you have ideas of how we actually get this addressed within the summit, or key organisations that we need to bring forwards to make sure we're not just talking about the actions, but we can actually marry the actions with the appropriate funding to make sure that progress can be made? So if there's any thoughts from the panel or anybody else on the call today, I think that's, yeah, I hate to bring up the money part, but it's going to be the reality. It's going to be the make or break of what happens.
As a university, it's the be all and end all. If we can't persuade somebody, be it an organisation like the TMC or industrial partners or governments to fund the research, then the research can't happen. It's that simple, really. We've seen some really well-funded projects from around Europe. There was one in Sweden. There's been one in Spain. And there's the one in Germany that just finished recently. I know they were looking for more money, and they've done some good work. But obviously, the current climate with what's going on with the pandemic and stuff might just be diverting research monies in a different direction. So it may be harder to get it from those government organisations. I mean, we've applied for several grants, both in the UK and internationally, to look at microfibre release in manufacturing, in the Far East, in India, Pakistan, and with the Japanese and Chinese, and we failed every single time. So it's not good news.
I think, yeah, no, it's a really good point, Mark. And I think what worries me is, we're hearing on one hand the kind of the area of travel for policy and the work that Jerome and his organisations are doing, but sometimes the research needs to happen so much more in advance of that, when the funders aren't actually aware of where the importance of funding going is needed. So I don't know, Jerome, if you can help guide us. What is the best way to make sure that any funders kind of understand how early we need to work, or the importance of work at these levels? Because I think quite often those conversations happen too late. I mean, as you can see, I think Mark said in one of his early slides, that the first papers that were coming through, the test methodology was all over the place. There was not really any funding at that point to support this. So any guidance you can give us of how we can best get in front of European funding? Or
well, if I had to give you now guidance on EU funding, we will be there until tomorrow. I'll leave some for Mauro as well in March. No, but I mean, we're working on this. We are working on this with the EU as well. So we regularly exchange with the EU on policy making, but we also inform them that there needs to be an efficient way of having public-private funding. Of course, funding in the EU is like a lasagna. You have regional funding, you have national fundings, you have EU fundings, and then you have different processes to get these fundings. You have Life Plus, you have Horizon 2020. So whether it is going to be in innovation, or whether it's going to be in scaling up an existing technology or something like that, you have many pilot projects that are being funded, but whether they will then scale up or not is also another discussion. So, I mean, there's a lot of fundings available out there, and as FASI, as the cross-industry agreement with our colleagues from Eurotex and so on, we're trying to make sure that we are in contact with all the little hands behind the scene, to make sure that they are aware of the needs, I would say, of the microfiber, microplastics community. We are telling them that, if they want to legislate, if they want to have, science-based evidence, this cannot auto-fund itself. And of course, I'm also aware there's a role for my members in there, for my industry, and for other industries. But I think, something like the summit as well will be an opportunity to bring all of these people together and to make sure that everybody understands that we are now at a maturity level where all the people involved need some funding if we want to really achieve something that at some point can become scalable in any type of political discussion as well. I understand here this is also a very global discussion, and I'm not the expert for the global aspects, but for the EU aspect, I understand that this discussion and the one at the summit will be helpful to make sure that the department responsible for funding is aware of the needs of the entire scientific community, first of all. Secondly, unfortunately, for the time being, the EU is going through its multi-annual financial framework discussion. So there's a lot happening there politically between various member states. My role is not to comment who's right in that discussion, but there are many discussions also on EU funding at innovation and so on. So, of course, and as Heather already mentioned, and Mark as well, the entire post-COVID recovery discussion will also have an impact on the size of the cake, if I can call it like this, for this issue. But yeah, from our standpoint, we're making sure that EU policymakers are aware, and they are. I remember we organized a very good conference with our German partners with the textile emission project in Brussels a while ago to draw the attention on innovation, on research funds. And I think that this has to continue all together, organizing events like this to really raise awareness.
Great. Okay, mindful, we've got 5 minutes left. There's still quite a lot of chat coming through. Maybe one more question from the chat, and then I just want to go back to the panel with one final remark as to what success looks like for them. But Trudy, is there one key thing coming through from the chat that we need to put to the panel?
Yeah, there's one actually. Matteo from EMF has sent a couple through, but I'll pull out his last one, where another point of concern for them with policy would be that it's focused more on upstream innovation, so how to prevent the fibres shedding in the first place, and not only downstream innovation in terms of capturing. And I didn't know whether there was any comment to, whether policy is looking at both of these areas.
If I may?
Go on.
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And that's also my first comment that I made when I said that we have to look at the entire life cycle of a product. There is a tendency also when we talk about circularity or other issues like this to only focus at the post-consumer stage or at the consumer stage. But we're aware that this is really all along the life cycle, and I think that also at design level, at manufacturing level, at process level, at fiber level, we have to look into all of this. And I think that this is actually the objective of such a test method. And I think that now phase 2 and 3 of these discussions will help us to achieve exactly what was mentioned by EMF.
Yeah,
I think there are challenges to addressing the downstream end, so capturing microfibers that are shed. If you try and build those systems into the white goods, what happens when the filters clog? People's kitchens flood, and then they get upset with the white goods manufacturer, and so they'll have to have bypass mechanisms built in. So once the filters are clogged, if people aren't cleaning them, they'll still be contributing to the same problem. I do think that the solution may have to come upstream.
And
what happens when they, sorry.
No, carry on, Heather.
What happens when the filters are cleaned out? What happens to those fibers? They get put in the trash gets taken to a landfill, it gets put in the landfill, then it rains, then the fibers get washed into the water system again. So I think the answer really should come.
They won't go in the trash. They won't go in the trash, Heather. They'll be treated like the filters in your Dyson.
They'll rinse it out in the sink.
No, just like the ones in your Dyson vacuum cleaner. Yeah, you'll rinse. You vacuum your carpet, you collect all the fibers off your carpet. When the filter's clogged, what do? It says it in the instructions. You run it under a tap until it runs clean.
Yep.
Just as we will be running our second webinar in January, which will be looking at product, and we'll be talking about some of the textile science around what we can actually do around the engineering side. So please come back and join us there, or join us at the summit. So yeah, we can talk for quite a while about that. I just want to, in the last couple of minutes, before we give out the discount code at the end, is just have one final remark from each of the panel speakers. What is success for you with regards to the summit? What one thing would you like to see coming out of it? And maybe starting with Heather, or anybody that wants to jump on first.
I think success would be everybody coming together and coming up with a solution together, like putting aside, what's the word? Competition, putting aside competition, putting aside, who comes up with what first, but getting together and coming up with a solution together, because this is a much bigger problem than just one brand or one company.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And Jerome or Mark?
Well, I think Heather really said it, and I would summarize it in only one word: alignment. Alignment for the industry, and alignment for all the stakeholders involved, and really to have a collaborative approach on solutions, identify also potential unforeseen consequences, like just what we mentioned with the filters and so on, and to really make sure that we do effective initiatives in the industry, effective policy making for decision makers, and that in the end we find real solutions to the problem in a way that works for everyone.
Great, thank you, Jerome. And finally with Mark.
I think much of it's been said. I think that it'd be really positive if the policymakers don't rush and make knee-jerk decisions. At a recent meeting to do with standards, it was brought up what happens if the Commission want to impose, say, limits on the standard test, and it's like, well, how can you when nobody even knows what's a good amount and what's a bad amount, what's big and what's high and low. And I also have a fear that there are potentially brands out there that might try and misuse information from the test method and the fibre shedding results to try and score over their competitors, and something that I'm really concerned about. This is meant to be used really for information to help people improve their products rather than just to try and sell more.
Yeah, exactly.